Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 2 of Politics 101, American Government and Public Policy. Today, we're going to begin our discussion of power and influence on political affairs by looking at kind of two answers to the classic political question of who actually is in charge around here, pluralism and elite theory. So we're going to define pluralism and elite theory, and then we're going to evaluate these different accounts of how political decisions get made and who's actually in charge and who influences political outcomes. So we're going to talk about this classic question of who governs. We're going to look at two different answers, pluralism and elitism, and then we're going to try to assess some of the evidence that we actually have been able to find as political scientists. So remember, let's do a quick review. What is political science? Our goal, again, is to understand and explain the world. So we're not just saying what happens, but trying to explain why and how things happen. Theories, in a positivist sense at least, should explain the observed phenomena. So they should explain something that we can observe in the political world, and they should also be able to predict future outcomes. And one other way you can think about this, they should be testable or falsifiable, if you're familiar with Karl Popper's famous definition of science, that we should be able to prove a theory wrong by finding some evidence that disconfirms it. So what kind of questions do we ask? What makes some people more likely to vote than others? What causes conflict and wars between states? What conditions make compromise in Congress more and less likely? And one kind of classic question in political science, and American political science especially, is one posed by Robert Dahl in his 1961 book, Who Governs? Democracy and Power in an American City. And his question is like, who actually governs the United States? Like, we know it's a democracy, we know that there are elected representatives, but like, what forces actually influence political outcomes? Is it the will of the people? Do the fact that we have democratic elections that allow all adult citizens to participate in government? Does that mean that what the people want is what the government does? Or do the fact that we have massive inequalities in wealth, knowledge, and social capital mean that there's actually going to be policy outcomes that don't reflect the will of the people? So he studies New Haven, Connecticut to test competing theories, and he's interested in testing two main theories, pluralism and elitism. Now, the dominant theory up till Dahl's time was known as elite theory, and the idea here is that a group not of wealthy, influential, and powerful elites, they are well educated, they have lots of money, they're well connected, they are able to exert control over decision-making institutions. They own the biggest businesses, they are the members of Congress, they are in charge, they are the lawyers, right? And this isn't like a conspiracy theory. This isn't like that they've all gotten together in some back room secret cabal to make decisions, but it's simply that the more money you have, the better educated you are, the better connected you are, the more access you have to decision-making institutions, right? The more, if you can afford to pay a $10,000 plate fundraiser, you're going to have more access to a politician than if you can't afford to do that. And therefore, the idea behind elite theory is that policy outcomes are going to benefit these elites and then reinforce this cycle, right? They'll have more power and more influence. This is most famously associated with the work of the sociologist C. Wright Mills in his 1956 book, The Power Elite. He focused on three power groups, the political elite, politicians, presidents, etc., political advisors, the economic elite, business owners, financiers, the wealthy, and the military elite, generals, people who have military power. And he answers in a different book, who, after all, runs America? No one runs it altogether, but insofar as any group does, the power elite. So we could look at the fact that a third of the US presidents have attended Ivy League schools, that majority of members of Congress come from law or business, despite the fact that the majority of the American people don't have a college degree. And as your textbook kind of summarizes, the nation's laws are made primarily by white, well-educated male professionals and businessmen. So we would expect kind of political outcomes to favor these elites, right? That it's the elites that actually control the world. Contesting this view is what's known as pluralist theory. And this is the idea that power is actually fairly well distributed in society, but that power isn't just concentrated in one group, but that power is exercised when people come together and form interest groups, right? We can have workers, business owners, environmentalists, and they all have interests in how industrial regulation is going to work. So they come and form interest groups. They work together to maximize their power as groups of people. They can exert electoral influence. Groups like the Natural Resources Defense Council or the American Federation of labor groups, right? And that there are inequalities, but because power isn't held by a handful of people, but is broadly distributed throughout society, that if you're able to mobilize enough people and build enough collective action, that you can influence policy outcomes, that you can get industrial regulations to pass in ways that benefit your group, right? That it's not about like elite just simply controlling things, but that political outcomes result from competition between groups at trying to exert both popular and electoral, gain more popularity, gain more group people, and then bigger groups can exert more electoral pressure. So who's right? Well, we want to go about testing these theories. So we're going to and to do that as political scientists, we want to develop testable hypotheses. So we want to think about what each theory would predict so that we can test it against the data. Well, elite theory is going to predict that most policy outcomes would reflect the interests and preferences of wealthy, highly educated, and well-positioned people, while pluralist theory would predict that most policy outcomes would reflect the interests and preferences of democratic majorities, or at least the results of interest group pressure, like larger, more popular interest groups are going to have their favored policies passed. And so we can test these hypotheses by looking backwards. We can look at political outcomes that we've observed and test them, see, well, do these political outcomes favor the wealthy, highly educated, and well-positioned, or democratic majorities? We can also make predictions looking forward. And then we can say like, oh, this is what we would expect to see. And then we can see, oh, what actually happened. So Dahl tried to do this backwards looking test. He looked at New Haven, Connecticut, and he did detailed interviews with people at all kind of rungs of life to determine who played crucial roles in political decisions. And he argues in the book that different citizens use different types of resources to influence officials, and that no one resource, whether education, wealth, social capital, connections, dominated the decision-making process, that power is diffuse throughout society. And this works because politicians have electoral incentives to be responsive to their constituencies. So if groups can organize around particular issues, they can exert leverage, even if they lack the same economic and political resources as the elites, right? Even if one person has a bunch of money, if you get 100 people saying that we're not going to vote for you, mayor, if you pass this law, even if that wealthy person supports the law, that the mayor is going to look at her electoral calculations and be like, oh, well, I better not pass this law. So there are some limitations to this theory, however. The first is, well, is New Haven representative of the country as a whole? This might be an accurate description of like small towns, but is it an accurate description of how like politics at the national level works? Does everyone actually have equal opportunity to participate in politics? Is power as diffuse in society as pluralists think it is? Do interest groups represent their members or wealthy donors? Are interest groups actually like pluralist? Or are interest groups just a way that elites can exert power in a democracy? And like, has this book was written in 1961. Is this analysis still accurate? Have laws and institutions changed in the last half century that would invalidate some of Dahl's answers? Well, two political scientists, Martin Gilens and Benjamin Page, tried to revisit this in 2014 and tried to test different kind of theories of American politics and power, elites, interest groups, and average citizens, trying to figure out which of these three groups, the elites, the interest groups, and the average citizens, actually exerts influence and powers. And so they were able to kind of create a testable theory here by gathering data on the policy preferences of affluent citizens, poor citizens, and those in the middle of the income distribution by looking at data sets of yes or no polls on a bunch of different policy issues between 1981 and 2002, and Similarly, they have a dependent variable where they have a measurement of whether or not the policy change in each of these 1,779 surveys was actually adopted within 4 years after the question was asked or not, right? So here, the independent variable is this preferences, and we're trying to see like whose preferences actually get realized in political outcomes, this dependent variable. And what they actually find is that when we kind of control for economic elites and interest groups, that they write that the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically insignificant impact on public policy. This is what this top graph is suggesting, that even as majority of the average Americans favor some policy that has very little effect on that policy actually being adopted, whereas you have this very positive slope for economic elites, right? As more and more economic elites favor a given policy, the more likely it is that that policy will be adopted, even if the overall percentage is lower, right? So the net alignment of the most influential business-oriented groups negatively related to the average citizen's wishes. And that's with reference to interest groups. The interest groups actually don't track what the average people want, like pluralist theory would suggest. The interest groups actually favor the interests of the economic elite. That not only are the interests of the economic elite what have impact on policy change, but interest groups favor the economic elite, not the average citizens. The interest groups don't actually respond to their members' wishes, but to the economic elite. And so this article was published in 2014, and it got a significant amount of buzz. So that's going to wrap us up for today. Our next lecture for this week is going to complicate this discussion of power and influence by asking, is power just a resource that can be used to influence political outcomes? Or does power function in other ways in a society? And we're going to be looking at that piece from John Gaventa to think about the different ways that power functions in a society. So that's it for this mini lecture. Stay tuned for the next lecture for this week on the three faces of power.